The 1990s, a decade defined by loud guitars, teenage angst, and a whole lot of flannel. It was the era of grunge, the absolute reign of alternative rock. The sound of a generation was raw, it was angry, and it was plugged in. If you wanted to get on the radio or get a video on MTV, you pretty much had to be angry, sad, or both. The cultural uniform was ripped jeans and a cynical attitude. The airwaves were just saturated with feedback and fury, a perfect reflection of a disaffected youth. It felt like a revolution, a total takeover. There were rules also, even if they were unwritten. And the rule number one was be authentic, be loud, be heavy. So how in the world did a band from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, playing the music of your great-grandparents, accidentally sell over 1 million records? How did a song that sounded like a cartoon about the underworld become a staple on modern rock radio? But the aftermath of that success was anything but beautiful. It was littered with broken relationships, betrayal, and plenty of litigation. As one member put it, it starts out fun, a lightning bolt hits, there's some success, and it devolves into egos, heartbreak, betrayal, and who owes whom, settled by the agents of the court. Because you guys requested it, we're going to explore the complete history of the Squirrel Nut Zippers. Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in the early 90s was a certified hotbed for indie music. But it was the cool kind of indie music. Bands like Superchunk and Archers of Loaf were defining the town's sound with jagged guitars and clever detached lyrics. It was a scene that fit right into the whole alternative nation. And then there was this. In 1993, the Squirrel Nut Zippers were born. It actually dates back to a group of friends led by Jimbo Mathus and his then wife Katharine Whalen, who started getting together. They just soaked up American music history from local libraries and record shops. They started hosting backyard informal jam sessions inspired by the fish fries of Mathus's childhood in Mississippi. Mathus had always wanted to be a musician, and he started playing in groups as young as 10 when he was playing mandolin in his father's bluegrass band that played different folk festivals and other events. Mathus remarked how his grandfather was a big fan of Glenn Miller and Benny Goodman and always heard that stuff in his house. Even though Mathus wanted to be a professional musician, his parents weren't really enthralled with the idea, so he did a brief stint in Mississippi State University where he studied philosophy. He still managed to play in some bands when time allowed, and after working as a deckhand on barges pushing boats up and down the Mississippi River, he was still longing to play music. He spent a lot of time all over America checking out the different music scenes as far as Alaska all the way to the West Coast, until he finally settled in Chapel Hill, North Carolina in 1989. To support himself, he worked in restaurant kitchens and wrote music for theater groups. He also made marionettes and played in jazz bands, and eventually became the drummer in a surf and rockabilly group called Metal Flake Mother. Mathus ended up meeting his future wife and future band member Katharine Whalen at a vegetarian restaurant they were both working at. It was Whalen's mother who suggested that she might want to make costumes for his marionettes. Mathus and Whalen soon started dating and eventually got married. It wasn't long after the pair moved to rural Effland, just outside of Durham, where they spent a lot of time listening to jazz, and Mathus even taught Whalen how to play banjo. Soon enough, other musicians from the local scene started coming over to their farmhouse where they had potluck dinners and jammed together. The founding lineup was quite eclectic. It consisted of Mathus and Whalen, Tom Maxwell, Ken Mosher, Chris Phillips, and Don Rowley. Some of them, as Mathus later admitted, had barely even played music before. These weren't seasoned pros, they were self-described theatrical troupe that was brought together by a shared obsession with the forgotten sounds. Their heroes were not Nirvana or Pearl Jam, they were Cab Calloway, Django Reinhardt, and Fats Waller. They fused Delta blues, 1930s hot jazz, and gypsy swing into a sound that was completely and totally out of step with everything else happening in music. The casual get-togethers eventually solidified into a band with a strange name and an even stranger sound. For the first several months of their existence, they were using the moniker Nut Zippers, which eventually morphed into Squirrel Nut Zippers. The name was taken from a brand of sticky peanut candy from the early 20th century, and turned out the band actually had to get permission to use the name from the Massachusetts company who was still in business. They had gotten a handshake agreement, and I want you guys to remember that fact for later on in the story. Once the band got famous, they actually were plugging the family-owned candy business a lot in interviews. But funny enough, the candy business was interviewed a lot in the mid-90s, and they said all the plugging they got from the band really didn't translate into a lot of additional sales. The name was perfect though. It captured the band's whole ethos. Part old-timey nostalgia, part wild, uninhibited spirit. The band made their live debut in the basement of a bistro in Chapel Hill. Their live shows were these manic vaudevillian spectacles. Whalen's vocals earned her comparisons to Billie Holiday, while Mathus and Maxwell brought a rowdy, almost punk rock energy to the stage, even while playing banjos and ukuleles. The Zippers were a joyous theatrical explosion, a feel-good dress-up dance party. They were playing party music for a party that had wrapped up 60 years ago. While initially starting out for fun and only planning on doing 2 gigs and that was it, they soon started winning over fans that ranged from teenagers to senior citizens. For teens, their music was new and fresh, and for seniors, it was, well, familiar. Mathus admitted that the band weren't just into the old music, adding, "We're really into the antique aesthetic in general, music or film or any ways of dressing." Squirrel Nut Zippers were soon getting requests to play clubs, weddings, wine tastings, and yes, even a fireman's ball, as well as other functions. It was only a month or 2 after forming that the band were offered a deal from local Chapel-based indie label Merge Records, who put out an EP called Roasted Right in late 1994 sometime. It was shortly after this the band signed to a bigger label, Mammoth Records, and in 1995 the label put out their debut LP, The Inevitable. It was recorded on the cheap for just $6,000. The Inevitable, despite its low budget, was charming, it was low-key, and it ended up catching the ear of programmers at NPR and college radio stations. It established the group as a quirky outlier with a small but devoted cult following. And dance around. Yes, we must go. The band was doing well enough, playing small tours, sometimes bringing in as many as 700 to 1,000 people at a single show. Most of the band's songs were also more cheerier than what was popular at the time. Mathus recalled, "That's why the Zippers came about. We're all in our late 20s and early 30s, and there wasn't time for this stuff anymore. A lot of our fans say, I'm so tired of the depressing stuff. I didn't realize you could have this music that was happy and still be cool." 1995 proved to be a huge year for the group. They were making waves playing the Sundance Film Festival, and then they also appeared on Conan O'Brien's Late Night Show. They were also announced as performers at the Olympic Park in the following year's Olympics in Atlanta. For an art project born out of backyard jams, this was already a huge success. No one, least of all the band, could have possibly predicted what was about to happen next. By the end of the year, the band had really honed their sound through nonstop gigging, and they had a fresh batch of songs and a wild idea from songwriter Tom Maxwell. He'd learned that legendary producer Daniel Lanois, famous for his work with U2, owned a mansion in New Orleans called Kingsway Studios that he'd actually converted into a recording space. Maxwell somehow convinced their indie label to let them record there. There was one catch though. They could only afford 1 week. So in the fall of 1995, the band descended on New Orleans to record their second album titled Hot. The sessions were an absolute whirlwind. They recorded live, often with a single microphone, trying to capture the raw, spontaneous energy of old jazz records they loved so much. There was zero commercial expectations. They were just a weird little band making a record they loved, soaking in the haunted musical vibe of the city, resulting in a record that was steamier and more decadent than their first release. Released in June of 1996, Hot ended up selling around 30,000 copies in its first 6 months, and the band were pretty happy with that result. They were a successful indie band as they saw it. But then something strange started to happen. An ambitious label rep on the West Coast had a hunch about one of the album's weirdest tracks called Hell. It was a calypso-flavored, deliriously upbeat tune written by Tom Maxwell that gleefully listed all the punishments waiting for sinners in the afterlife. But tomorrow there'll be hell to pay. The afterlife. That rep started relentlessly pushing the song to K-Rock in Los Angeles, one of the most influential modern rock stations in the country. According to Maxwell, the station initially played it as a joke, and can you guys imagine? Squeezed between the brooding anthems of Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden was this manic banjo and horn-driven song about eternal damnation. It made no sense. But then the station's phone started to ring off the hook. People loved it. The joke had actually backfired spectacularly. Hell soon exploded, and it was added to the buzz bin on MTV, and its surreal cartoonish music video went into heavy rotation. It was quickly sandwiched between Hanson and Marilyn Manson on the network. By April of 1997, the song officially hit the Billboard charts, peaking at number 13 on the alternative charts. And Mathus ended up telling the Star Ledger about the song. that he had an inkling feeling that it might be a hit. He stated, "Our audiences seemed to build rapidly during our concert, and when we played the song, they'd go crazy. That would always be the last song of our set because it's such a high energy number." The album Hot suddenly caught fire, and it shot up the Billboard 200 chart, where it stayed there for 51 weeks. It had sold over 1 million copies. Suddenly, a band that had started in the backyard was now a national phenomenon. They were launched into a strange new reality. They ended up performing at the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta. They played President Clinton's second inaugural ball. They also appeared on The Tonight Show and The Late Show with David Letterman. For a brief shining moment, the Squirrel Nut Zippers were simply everywhere. They, at the same time, were not in tune or much aware of what was popular in music at the time. With Mathus admitting, "We're totally out of it. We're two people," referring to him and his wife, "who don't keep up with the pace of alternative bands or are into British rock or psychedelic music or God knows what at all." Their accidental success happened to coincide with, and in many ways helped ignite, the full-blown swing revival of the late 90s. Suddenly, groups like the Brian Setzer Orchestra, Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, and Cherry Poppin' Daddies were all over the place, and the Gap was now running commercials with kids doing the Lindy Hop.
Baby, baby, it looks like it's gonna happen.
But for the Zippers, this was a double-edged sword. They had, after all, come before the fad. They drew from a much wider, more authentic well of American music, and now they were seen as the leaders of a trend that they really never wanted to be a part of, a movement that to them felt commercial and fake. They were the poster children for a scene they didn't even feel like they belonged to. The dizzying, unexpected ride to the top had been a thrill, but it was already starting to feel like a curse. So how does a fiercely independent art project deal with becoming a platinum-selling machine? Well, for Squirrel Nut Zippers, the short answer is not well. The sudden glare of the mainstream spotlight started to show the cracks in the foundation. The pressures of the constant tours, the demands from their label, and the internal battles over their own musical identity began to take a serious toll. They followed up 1996's Hot with perennial favorites in 1998. The album, according to one interview the members gave to the Asheville Citizen-Times, had actually been recorded as far back as 1996, but it was put on hold to allow Hot to cool down.
The limo up goes a thrill. The suits are picking up the bill.
It was several days prior to the release of their second album, Hot, that the band drafted up a partnership agreement that spelled out how earnings and losses would be split amongst all the members. All profits and losses would be split equally amongst the band. All disputes would be dealt with through arbitration instead of lawsuits. Money from publishing, which accounted for radio play, television play, commercials, and soundtrack earnings, would be split amongst the band members and not just the people who wrote the songs. Keep in mind, this was all hypothetical by the time they drafted up this agreement. Their first album, in fact, had only sold 20,000 copies by the time this agreement was signed, so the members weren't quitting their day jobs just yet. But after the success of Hell, the band was raking in big dollars. They were playing private gigs, sometimes making as much as $75,000 a night, and commercials were using their music. Intel licensed one of their songs from Hot and paid the band $350,000 for the TV spot. In fact, in 1997 alone, the band grossed over $1 million. Now, Squirrel Nut Zippers was also Mammoth Records' Golden Goose. And another big thing that happened in the late 90s was that Disney bought the label for $25 million. So, of course, there was a lot of pressure to come up with another hit. Their follow-up to Hot, 1998's perennial favorites, sold less than half of what Hot did. And behind the scenes, the band suffered also a personal tragedy after one of the band's original members, Stacey Guess, who played trumpet, died from a heroin overdose in 1998. Guess had left the group prior to Hot being released, but the news hit the band particularly hard. The band released a second album in 1998, Christmas Caravan, and by 1999, Tom Maxwell and Ken Mosher quit the group. And then the legal issue started. In 2000, Mosher and Maxwell discovered that management and accounting fees were still being deducted from the royalties. The pair demanded repayment, but after being ignored, they pursued arbitration in 2001, alleging a breach of partnership agreement. An arbitrator ruled in 2002 that Maxwell and Mosher were owed in the order of about $350,000 payable by the other 5 members. They also regained control of their publishing rights to their songs. In 2003, the dispute was settled for $155,000, with payments being staggered over time. The battle went on for so long that Mosher ended up selling his house where they recorded perennial favorites, and Maxwell was nearly broke with only $200 left, while Whalen had to sell her banjo. Bandleader Mathus told the News Observer, "Those 2 guys quit. They resigned to start their own thing. They sued me and took all the money from Squirrel Nut Zippers. It about ruined us all. It's not, but just jealousy and greed. Those are the 2 factors at work." Then the band ran into another issue. Well, it turned out the candy company who they took their name from now had a new owner, as the previous one had passed away. The company's new owner, Southern Style Nuts, filed a lawsuit against the band, and the lawsuit was settled, but it cost the band a lot of money. Squirrel Nut Zippers limped along for another year, putting out the final record, Bedlam Ballroom, in 2000. It sold just shy of 70,000 copies, a far cry from their heyday. The so-called swing revival fad was now over, and the problems just got worse and worse for the remaining members. In April of 2000, Katharine Whalen gave birth to a daughter and toured with the baby and her husband Mathus for Bedlam Ballroom shows. But after returning, Mathus left to tour with his own blues band and just never returned, leading Whalen to file for divorce. Mathus ended up relocating to Mississippi, remarried while Whalen raised her daughter alone and returned to waiting tables and restarted her music career as well. The band was over by the end of 2000. Tom Maxwell did an AMA on Reddit where he admitted how things were falling apart pretty much as far back as 1996. He stated, "Honestly, we were breaking up when we were recording perennial favorites, just as hell took off. Our life was prolonged, I think. The Disney thing sucked, but so did the whole smash and grab feel of the whole thing. If we as a band had been able to row in the same direction, we might have stuck it out. That's what you do in a lifeboat. That and assume that the water is full of sharks," which it was. The members in the aftermath of the band going on a hiatus worked on other things. Whalen released a solo jazz album, Jimbo Mathus launched a critically acclaimed career as a solo artist and producer, and even spent years playing guitar in blues legend Buddy Guy's band. The story, it seemed, was finished, but the legacy of their improbable success lingered. They had cracked open a door, and they proved that authenticity, even a weird old-timey authenticity, could find a massive audience. They helped turn a new generation's attention back to the foundational genres of American music, influencing a wave of retro and roots artists like Pokey LaFarge and J.D. McPherson, who would follow in their footsteps. They were a glitch in the matrix of the 90s music, a reminder that popular taste is far more unpredictable and eclectic than the industry gatekeepers would want you to believe. And then the story took another turn. In 2007, some original members, including Mathus and Whalen, reunited for a successful tour. But the real revival came in 2016 to mark the 20th anniversary of Hot. Jimbo Mathus and original drummer Chris Phillips reformed the Squirrel Nut Zippers with a completely new dynamic lineup. This wasn't just a nostalgia act, it was a full-on reinvention. Of course, there were still some bad blood between the original members. The new version of the band has been incredibly busy touring constantly and releasing new music that both honors and expands on their classic sound. Their 2018 album Beasts of Burgundy debuted at number 4 on the Billboard Jazz Albums chart, and they followed that up with their most recent album in 2020. The story of the Squirrel Nut Zippers is a testament to the beautiful absurdity of pop culture. In an era dominated by angst and distortion, a bunch of North Carolina bohemians playing music from the jazz age somehow conquered the charts. Their success was a complete accident, a product of a rogue DJ, one insanely catchy tune, and a public that was subconsciously hungry for something, anything different. But their music and their incredible story endures. It's a story about the power of having a unique vision, about a group of artists who made the music they wanted to make with absolutely no expectation of success. And in doing so, they accidentally sold a lot of albums, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most wonderfully improbable hitmakers of their time. What other unlikely hits from the 90s do you guys think have a hidden history worth telling? Let me know in the comments section below, and who knows, maybe someday I'll make a video about it. That brings us to the end of today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.